In this video, we're going to scatter another set of shapes using the Shape Splatter node. And these are going to be more small dirt shapes. So before we get started, I do want to just mention that I did make a few changes from the last video. So I just came over here to my crop, chose just a different shape. Again, just looking at what I thought would work best, and you can see I went in and just chose a few different shapes here. One other change that I made, if I come over here to my materials and I do edit, you can see that I increased my scale from a value of 10 to a value of 20. In this particular case, there's not a specific reason why I'm choosing this value of 20. Like I said, we can work with height scale for our patterns relative to the background height, and that can be based on the actual scale here of the primitive we're using, which is 100 by 100 units. In fact, all of these primitives are going to be 100 by 100 units here in Designer. So what I've done here is just chose a value of 20, just arbitrarily. That's what I wanted to go with. I'm choosing that as my overall displacement value, and then I'm adjusting all my other values that I'm working with in my height relative to this main displacement setting here for my shader. Okay, so what we're going to do now, like I said, is we're going to create another instance here of our shape splatter. So what I'm going to do is just start to type in shape, and we have our shape splatter. So we need to create some patterns that we're going to use, and so what I'm going to do is reuse some of these nodes that we already have, and so we're going to start here with this levels. However, I'm going to change the pattern a bit by using the slope blur grayscale, except this time, instead of using the slope blur as a trimming tool, we're going to use it to rough up the overall surface of the shape. So it's just another way of using slope blur. So here I'll hit the space bar. Let's do a search for our slope blur grayscale. And what we're going to do is come off our levels here, and we're going to plug that into the grayscale input. Now we need a slope. And so like I said, we're using the slope grayscale to create a different type of effect, whereas before we were using it as a trim tool. And what really makes this a trim tool is the type of slope that we're feeding into it. So for example, here with this purlin noise, you can see that we have these soft, more transitional shapes like this. However, if we want to use it as a tool for like roughing up the overall surface or damaging edges and things like that, we want to use something that is a bit more grungy on the roughness or the noise. So in a situation like this, I like to rely on the Clouds 2 noise. If we take a look, you can see that, well, we do have a Clouds 2 that's already being used way up here in our small shape. Now, anytime we can reuse a node, that's going to be the best in terms of optimization for our graph. So like I said, since we already have this node, let's just reuse it. And again, working with these nodes in this nonlinear environment, it's really easy to do that. So here I'm just going to single left click so I can just borrow out this connection. And then I'm just going to navigate here to where I have this new slope blur. And let's just plug in the slope here for this. So now you can see that we have a connection line that's going all the way from this Clouds 2 noise, and it's feeding down here into the slope of this slope blur grayscale. Now, something else that we can do just to kind of help with the organization of our graph, you can see here we have this line that's just going straight through the graph. If I just hold down the Shift and Alt key, you can see that all of the connection lines have this little yellow dot in the middle of them. So here, let me just zoom into this area. I'm gonna hold down Shift Alt and I have this little dot. What I can do is just left click on this and drag it out, and that just helps me to create like an elbow joint here to this connection line, and it just helps me to make this a little bit more readable. So here I can see that this Clouds 2 is feeding into this blend, but it's also its data is also flowing down here through this little connector point and then into the slope blur. So again, when I take a look at my graph, it's nice and readable, and I can see exactly where this noise is being used. All right, so like I said, we're going to come in here and take a look at this slope blur to rough up the overall surface. Now, what I'm going to do here for my mode is I am going to switch this to min, and you'll probably find that you use the min mode most often when you're working with your slope blur grayscale. And so now we can also just kind of play around with some of these values. So I'm going to keep the samples fairly low, and the intensity probably around, let's just do 9.5. So if we take a look, this is what we're getting here. And again, I'm just going to kind of play around a little bit here with these samples. Let's just maybe try 12. So you can see, what this is doing here. It's providing me with a lot of detail, and this, starts to appear more rock-like in nature. And that's pretty good. We're going to use this. However, the way it stands right now is it's, quite noisy. And so what I'm going to do right after this slope blur is I'm going to hit my space bar. I'm going to create a blur node, and let's just connect this into here. Now, the intensity is really high, so it's just basically obliterated all of my detail. So we're just going to take this intensity slider and drop it down to where we get something more like this. So essentially what we've done here is just kind of smoothed out some of this really hard edge detail and some of this detail that's just kind of hanging out here. By blurring it out, we just essentially can help get rid of some of that. But essentially what we've done here is it's almost like we've added a smooth modifier here to this shape that we have. So a lot of detail, we had a blur, which is like a smooth modifier, and this is the new shape pattern that we have. So just as we did before, we're going to want to use a couple of these crops here so that we can isolate a specific shape out of this texture sheet, I'll say, that we've created here. So once again, I'm going to hit my space bar, and I am going to do a search for crop. We want to make sure that we use crop grayscale, and let's connect our blur into here. Here I'm going to double click to select my area, and we're going to use the manipulator here to select a specific shape. So just as we did in the previous video, let's do something like this. So now with this shape selected, I'll hit Control D to duplicate that crop. And let's do it one more time, Control D, we duplicate that crop. Okay, so we're gonna do just 3 patterns again. So let's just position these guys so everything looks nice and clean. Just move this down, and here let's move this connection line down like this. All right, so now let's come over to our area, and again, just gonna move my manipulator here to select a specific shape. We're gonna do the same thing on that 3rd crop node. And so let's just try to find something. Let's see, the first time I think I used that middle piece. Here, let's maybe go with this guy over here in the corner. Okay, so now I have these 3 new shapes that we're going to plug into the shape splatter. So another thing that's pretty cool about this shape splatter is we can start to stack these effects together by linking them. So the shape splatter, as I mentioned in the previous video, takes a background height as input. Well, we can just take the height from the original shape splatter that we did, and we can plug that into here. So what that's going to do, it's going to allow us to stack another set of shapes that we're going to splatter across the surface. Again, since we're using, if we scroll down to where we have this height, again, we're using this conform to background, so it means that this new set of shapes can conform to the background of this previous height, which also includes these other mounds and shapes, and this allows us to correctly blend height levels together. And this will come in handy later when we want to create some twig shapes that we want to have laying over top of some of the rocks and so on. So the shape splatter is also really good for blending height levels like this. All right, let's go back to our parameters, and let's come up here to our pattern input. I'm going to switch this to a value of 3, and then we're going to start to feed our outputs into here. So pattern 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so we are now good to go with this. Let's double click this shape splatter so we can view this in the 2D view. We also need to make sure we're viewing this in our 3D view as well. So once again, we are just going to redistribute our connection lines that's going out to our normal AO and base material node. So hold down the shift key, left click the output, and then just redistribute this connection line. And again, we'll just reorg some of our nodes so that we can, see the flow that we have here. Okay, so now it's just a matter of going in and starting to make some tweaks here to what we want to work with. So this time, I want these shapes to be smaller and a lot more of these. So these are going to be like small little dirt rocks that are just kind of collecting all over the ground. And this here is going to be just kind of larger kind of dirt mound shapes. So what we're going to start with here is coming into our X and Y amount, and let's set this to 64, and I'll just hit tab just to quickly go to the next input field and then type 64 and enter. So now we have a lot of shapes here on the ground. Looks kind of cool. Looks almost like little pixel art at this stage. But what we need to do is start to come in and play around with our scale and our position and rotation. So let's set our scale up to a value of around 5 here. And this is kind of what we're getting here. Again, this is looking kind of interesting. Let's see. The next thing we want to do is come over to our position, and I'm going to increase my position random. So we're going to randomize this quite a bit. And let's do the same thing here for our rotation. So a rotation random. Now, just as we did before, where we used this per-lin noise to derive our shape scale, let's do that again. We already have the noise here, so it's not going to hurt. So let's plug this in here to our shape scale. And then we need to come over to our scale map multiplier, give this some value here. All right, so now we're getting this. The next thing that I want to do is scroll down here towards the bottom, and I'm going to introduce some masking here. So my mask random, let's just go ahead and increase this value as well. All right, so now we're getting this type of effect. So now we need to come over here and start to really take a look at this height depth, because this is where we're going to start to adjust our offsets. First thing, I'm going to use my conform to background, so let's drag this slider up fairly high. So already, once we start to do that conform to background, we can see things are starting to come into place here with this. And then we can come in and start to adjust our height offset. So we'll get something like this. Let's do a little height offset random. Let me decrease here some of my mask random. It's just going to be a matter now of just kind of playing around with this to get the overall look that I want. So now you can see that, again, the whole purpose of this was just to add just a little bit more kind of chaotic detail here. Now I have this in place. Let's come back here to our scale map multiplier. Let's just drag this down a little bit. Playing around with some of these values. Scale random. Let's increase some of this. Scale map multiplier. And here we go. All right, so let's see. Also, let me play around here with, so our height scale. This is something we didn't talk about in the previous video, but you can see it's set at a value of 1. I can actually overcrank this. So if I set this to, say, a value of 2, you can see that I can actually raise those shapes upwards more. Now, this is, I don't like this. I don't want to do it, but I just wanted to let you know that you were able to do that. So let's just set this back to 1. And again, here I'm just going to start to continue to play around with my height offset. Let me also take a look at maybe increasing my X and Y amount. So let's just go to 100 by 100 and see what that does. Okay, that's interesting. And then maybe we will adjust our height offset again. And then finally, let's see here, maybe a little bit more mask random. Yeah, it all comes down to just trying to tweak these values to get what you want. And I feel like I'm kind of losing some of this. Like I like these little shapes in here. They look pretty cool, but maybe they're too small. So you can see here that you kind of have this push and pull effect when it comes to your X and Y amount versus your scale. The more patterns I add via the X and Y amount, the smaller the shapes get. So here, let's see. Let's maybe take this down to 75 by 75. And maybe I'll just end up going with something like this here. Okay, so let me just zoom out here on my graph, and let me just kind of reorganize some of these nodes. So I'm going to select this group, these nodes here, and I'm going to frame these up. So let's select this group of nodes. I'm going to click my frame button, and this is going to be my small dirt shapes. And maybe instead of shapes on this one, we'll call this just medium dirt mounds. Okay, so that's going to close out this video. In the next video, we're going to continue creating small rocks and some twigs.